It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett. A group of Democrats have reintroduced a resolution in the state legislature called the Economic Justice Bill of Rights. According to sponsors, the resolution addresses economic inequality, racial discrimination, gender inequities, and environmental crises. That proposal has fallen short in past sessions and faces a tough road this time around as a Democratic bill in a Republican-controlled legislature. From living wages to childcare access to the right to unionize, we're learning more about the proposal from one of its sponsors. Representative Angela Stroud represents the 73rd Assembly District. That includes portions of Douglas and Bayfield counties. Representative Stroud, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get to that resolution, Representative Stroud, you're one of several state lawmakers serving your first legislative term. How would you describe the relationship between the Republican majority and your Democratic minority in the state assembly?
You know, we talk to each other. We work on bills together. When it comes down to a lot of the votes you've seen recently, these are clearly very partisan bills, and so you see clear splits by party. But that's because of the bills that have been proposed. It doesn't really reflect the interest, the desire, and the work that happens behind the scenes to try to work together as best as we possibly can.
And what are some of your priorities as a first-term legislator?
I just really want to help make government work. You know, we are seeing at the federal level this attack on government. The desire, it seems, is to do that thing that Grover Norquist said decades ago, make it small enough to drown in a bathtub. And yet, government plays a critical role in our lives. And so we have to have a functional, competent government that upholds democratic principles so that we can, flourish as citizens of this state.
You are part of this Democratic effort to reintroduce the Economic Justice Bill of Rights. Can you talk about the priorities, the goals you're trying to highlight in this resolution?
Yeah. So this resolution is about showing a vision of where we should be focused. So many of the bills we've been voting on recently in the Assembly are bills designed simply for political purposes to distract us. Many of the bills we voted on recently were known to be vetoed by the governor. They've been vetoed in the past. He said out loud he's going to veto them again. But we are offering something very different with this. What we're saying is Democrats in Madison have a vision of a society in which everybody has a job that provides dignity at work and pays a living wage, where we have adequately funded public education and affordable, accessible childcare, where union rights are protected and collective bargaining becomes a part of, every job again, where we have affordable, accessible, and comprehensive high-quality healthcare. And that's just the beginning.
This is a resolution. It is like those Republican bills likely to be vetoed by a Democratic governor. Well, this is a Democratic resolution that's likely not to pass in a Republican legislature. Is this just symbolic, therefore?
I mean, insofar as we don't have the power to move it forward, there are barriers, of course, of seeing it through. But we also need to show voters out there that we're not just against Republicans. We're not just against their bills. We actually have a vision for a totally different way of operating in Madison. If we were in the majority, we would be proposing legislation that would make their lives better in terms of economics, in terms of their families. And so we're making a case here to the voters. So in that way, it's not at all symbolic. It's really just a pitch to say, if you want to see, a society in which we have equity in terms of access to resources and access to affordable housing, there's a party that has your back, that's interested in taking care of concerns that you're worried about. And so, let's work together to make this happen.
We are talking about an Economic Justice Bill of Rights proposal in the state legislature from Democrats. One of the sponsors is with us, Representative Angela Stroud from northern Wisconsin, a district including Ashland, Douglas, and Bayfield counties. Are you going to take pieces of this? You listed the first half or so of that Economic Justice Bill of Rights. We'll get into some of the other issues. But are you going to, in this session, take some of these and say, hey, can we find ways, for example, to provide dignity at work and implement legislation, work with Republicans on something we can compromise on and pass, even if Democrats are not getting exactly a minimum wage increase in this legislature?
Yeah, any parts of this that Republicans are interested on working on, we are all ears and, totally willing to do that work together. So whether it's a clean, sustainable environment, for example, clean water, protecting our environment. Those are things that it's not even bipartisan, it's nonpartisan. Nobody wants chemicals in their water. And so we need to be working together now and not wait for the majority. You're absolutely right about that, to see where we can make progress.
What kind of bills, for example, would you chase for the environment? A lot of talk about PFAS legislation. Some has been passed, but money in limbo. Is that a particular instance of an environmental piece of legislation you might see room for common ground on?
I hope so. What we're seeing is where the divide lies in terms of the parties on that issue in particular is who should be responsible. So if a company dumps chemicals into the water supply and your well is no longer usable, my view and the view of the Democratic Party is the company should be responsible for that. Why would homeowners be responsible for something that they didn't do? And so that's where the rub is with a lot of these things is where are we going to place accountability? And I hope we can work together to figure out compromises where we need to. Some things are hard to compromise on, though. We're not going to, make cleaning up water from chemical spills the responsibility of private citizens. That's just not right. And so, but where we can work together, we absolutely will, and we absolutely must, because the people of the state need it.
One of the ones you touched on, equitable access to capital investments, financial institutions, and retirement. It's kind of a mission statement. What kind of things, what kind of legislation might a Democratic majority pursue to put that notion into operation?
So if you look at the retirement part of that, for example, we have various public service jobs where we don't see equitable access to the Wisconsin retirement system. I was just touring Douglas County Jail earlier this week, and prison guards, for example, don't have equitable access to retirement. And that's one of the hardest parts of the criminal justice system is working in jails, and yet it's the lowest paid, most poorly remunerated part of the criminal justice system. And we need to be thinking about how can we leverage access to a good retirement plan as part of the way to attract and retain employment in that really critical sector. So that's just one example, but we could use that for all kinds of examples, thinking about teachers and even childcare workers. How can we make sure that people have access to jobs of dignity and living wages and a robust retirement plan?
Another one you listed earlier, union, public or private, and collective bargaining as, in effect, a right of Wisconsinites. Would that mean, as a hypothetical Democratic majority in the future, you'd pursue something like repeal of Act 10 for public workers and of what are described as right to work laws for private employees?
Absolutely. I mean, unions were invented in this state and they built the middle class and they're core to strong middle class jobs today. We have to have the rights for workers to be at the table, to talk about things like salaries, salary benefits, and working conditions. It's a fundamental right that's protected by the Constitution. And when we see strong unions, we see strong communities and strong economies. So that's a core Wisconsin tradition. And we see the effects of losing those rights, looking at our public school system, for example. And so fighting for the right to collectively bargain is a core principle of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin.
Another agenda item you mentioned, affordable, accessible childcare in the state. We've talked on the show about a double bind, low paid workers in the childcare business, but high costs for parents looking for childcare when they can find it at all. What kind of legislation, what kind of initiatives would you pursue to tackle that issue?
A lot of the things that are in this proposal are really in Governor Evers' budget proposal. And so when you look at child care accounts, it's this state subsidy for child care employees so that they can be paid a wage that's dignified. And so child care centers can attract and retain high quality employment without that being on the backs of the parents paying for that child care. So some of this, we already know how to do it. We've done it before. We just have to keep up the funding levels and make sure that every family in Wisconsin has access to high quality childcare. As the Secretary of Workforce Development likes to say, childcare is the workforce behind the workforce. We don't have a strong economy if we don't have access to high quality, reliable, and affordable childcare. So the state has to play a role there.
You've pitched this, and others have pitched this elsewhere, this overall economic justice bill of rights, as in part an effort to reach out to working class Wisconsinites, a perception at least that the Democratic Party isn't the party of the working class anymore. How do you tackle that issue? How do you make the case toward working class Wisconsinites that Democrats have something for them?
I mean, we do it by showing up and having ideas that meets their needs. And this there's a lot of rhetoric on the campaign trail by various politicians saying that I have your back or I'm looking out for you. But when it comes down to it, it's all about policy. And this is a vision for policies that actually meet the needs of working people, that focus on working class, middle class, disabled, elderly, retired people, and recognizing that the market isn't going to provide for people on the margins. That's the role that we need to think about playing. And we need to figure out how to build a strong foundation on which a robust economy can exist. But yeah, working class people, I think they're seeing right now what an administration that says they're about working class people, but then when they get into office, the policies are all focused on how can we cut taxes for the billionaires, and that's not helping, and that's destabilizing our economy. And unfortunately, working class people, whether they voted for Trump or not, are going to be the ones who are hit the hardest.
In our last few moments, you've been holding town halls in your district in northern Wisconsin. What kind of things are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, first of all, people are super fired up, and they're really worried about the takeover of the federal government by Elon Musk. In Superior the other day, people were talking about, like, how can this be? How is this legal? Apparently, it cost $250 million to buy the presidency. And people are they're scared. Last night at a town hall in Washburn, I had a woman say, what happens if they take my Social Security? And she was terrified, and she was blaming herself. She was saying, we didn't plan well enough. And I was like, it's not your fault. You shouldn't have to anticipate that at some point someone would try to dismantle the safety net that you paid into. And so people are scared, they're angry, and I'm trying to show up and be a representative who wants to hear from them, who wants to be present. Unfortunately, our congressional representative up here is not doing that.
Representative Stroud, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Angela Stroud is a Democratic representative in the 73rd Assembly District that includes portions of Ashland, Douglas, and Bayfield counties. Coming up, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations returns to her alma mater, UW-Madison, to talk about the art of negotiation and about the dismantling of USAID.
My heart is breaking. I have worked on these issues for my entire career. In fact, more than half of my life. I came into the Foreign Service at 29.
Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield is next on WPR News. You're listening to Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett. A pivotal race for state Supreme Court is getting lots of attention, but Tuesday's election also features a referendum on whether to enshrine Wisconsin's voter ID law in the state constitution. WPR's Sean Johnson has this report on how claims about the law have held up over nearly a decade of elections.
If you listen to debate on voter ID in the Wisconsin State Assembly, you might hear a case like this on the right.
We're going to make sure that everyone who's entitled to a ballot gets one, and that we know who the people are that are getting a ballot.
Or like this on the left.
It is no way to encourage democracy. It's pure politics, plain and simple.
Republicans stress that voter ID is about securing elections.
Wisconsinites want it to be easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Democrats say it's about manipulating elections.
It is a transparent effort to preserve political power for one party.
That was former Representatives Jeff Stone and Donna Seidel, and current Representatives William Penterman and Greta Neubauer. While they all hit familiar themes, their debates happened 14 years apart. Republicans passed a voter ID law in 2011. The 2025 debate is about whether to make it a constitutional amendment and more or less permanent. At the core of the Republican case, then and now, is that voter ID prevents fraud. Fond du Lac County District Attorney Eric Toney says the law is important because it enhances confidence in the election process.
One of the things they teach us in law school is sometimes the appearance of impropriety can be worse than actual impropriety.
But despite 9 years' worth of elections under voter ID, Barry Burden at the University of Wisconsin Elections Research Center says proof that it prevents fraud is basically non-existent.
It doesn't prohibit a person from voting who might not live at their residence. That's a voter registration issue. It doesn't deter someone who has a criminal record or is under 18 or not a citizen. Those are caught in other kinds of ways.
Burden says the type of crime voter ID stops is voter impersonation. According to data maintained by the state's court system, those types of charges have been brought twice in the last 6 years. They've led to just a single conviction. One of the biggest arguments against voter ID is that it reduces turnout. In the 2016 election, the first with voter ID, turnout did drop, and some research suggested up to 10% of eligible voters who did not cast ballots were stymied by the law. But Burden says other factors were also at play.
Turnout rates in Wisconsin go up and down for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes the candidates are more appealing, sometimes they're less appealing.
In 2020, turnout was back up, and last year, Wisconsin's turnout led the nation. That's not to say all voters were affected equally by the changes. Anita Johnson handles voter outreach and education in Milwaukee for the group Souls to the Polls.
Black and brown people, people with disabilities, the senior citizens, they're all different types of groups that are suffering because of this photo ID or this voter ID law.
The law created a system for free IDs, and since 2011, more than 1.4 million have been issued. But Johnson says not every voter knows about the option. And without help, some people assume they can't vote. One thing Democrats and Republicans have always agreed on is that the courts would get involved in voter ID. Indeed, 2 state courts and a federal court blocked the law. A conservative majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court and a federal appeals court eventually reinstated it. Now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has a liberal majority, and Republicans, like Representative Dave Murphy, say voter ID could again be vulnerable. That's where the amendment comes in.
Having voter ID in the Constitution will keep it safe from activist courts.
If the amendment fails, voter ID would still remain in effect unless a future legislature or court decides to change that. If it passes, this long-running debate could effectively be over, with voter ID the law of the land in Wisconsin for decades to come. Sean Johnson, Wisconsin Public Radio.
Decades before Linda Thomas Greenfield was confirmed as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations in 2021, she was a graduate student at UW-Madison, earning her master's degree in public administration. She went on to work in the career foreign service for 4 decades and left her UN ambassador post this year. Now she's returning to Wisconsin for a talk hosted by the La Follette School of Public Affairs. The event's called The Art of Negotiation. It's Tuesday at UW-Madison's Memorial Union. Kate Archer-Kent spoke with Ambassador Thomas Greenfield last week about the state of international relations and how to interact with people who have differing opinions.
You've worked on issues related to Africa throughout your career, and then in September you announced that the U.S. would supply more than $400 million in additional humanitarian aid to help with the crisis in Sudan. And I'm wanting you to bring us up to speed. What is happening there? What kind of suffering are Sudanese people experiencing?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because sometimes the press and the world ignore the situation in Sudan because there's so many crises happening elsewhere in the world that get more attention. But more than 25 million people in Sudan have been forced from their homes or on the verge of starvation because of a civil war that is taking place between 2 generals, 2 men who are fighting for their ambitions, not fighting for their people, not fighting for their country, but fighting for positions against each other. And more than 1 million of those people have gone across the border into the country of Chad. I visited Chad twice during my tenure as ambassador and saw the misery, saw the starvation, and saw the lack of hope. One young girl told me that after being raped, she was a student and she'd lost her ambition. And so that $400 million will help her regain her ambition, but it also will feed people who are on the verge of famine.
You know, it's nearly 7,000 miles separating Wisconsin from Northeast Africa. And I know you get this question, but why is it important to reach more stability in this region? And why should the U.S. and us here in Wisconsin be interested in this? Have a stake.
Thank you again for that question. I used to answer that question with a simple response, and it was that Americans, as people, as a country, we care. We care about what is happening elsewhere in the world. But there is a bigger response to that, and that is if instability is happening someplace in the world, it does have an impact on us. We may see it in terms of extra migrations to the United States. We'll see it in terms of conflict. We have Americans who live and work in these countries. Their lives are in danger. So it does have an impact on us. And again, I do think as Americans, we care. We have a sense of compassion that I'm very, very proud to be associated with.
In recent months, we've seen the U.S. cut back on its funding for foreign aid that includes Sudanese refugees. What might happen when these people are cut off from this funding?
Well, we've already seen the results of that as we start to hear from various places in the world that people are desperate and that they are facing starvation. But even more important here in the United States, we have farmers who provided that assistance, and their products are sitting on their farms or in ports not being moved. We have American jobs that are connected to our aid programs, and those jobs also have been impacted.
Has it been difficult for you to see the Doge team and Elon Musk trying to permanently close USAID, which, you know, has aligned with so many of your important causes like food security and human rights?
You know, my heart is breaking. I have worked on these issues for my entire career. In fact, more than half of my life. I came into the Foreign Service at 29, and I remember my first visit to a refugee camp with a USAID employee who had committed her life to supporting humanitarian programs. And I kind of learned the job from her and many others from USAID. And so my heart is breaking for those people. It's breaking for the people that they helped, and it's breaking for their families.
The Trump administration has been framing these cuts as canceling programs that did not serve the core interests of the U.S., also alleging fraud and misuse. When you were ambassador, how did aid programs serve the interests of the country, but how did agencies also prevent fraud or misuse of funds?
In my early years in the Foreign Service, I worked as a refugee coordinator, and that job was to provide assistance to refugee camps, and some of that assistance was provided by USAID. My responsibility was to ensure that there was no waste, there was no fraud. And so I traveled on little planes that looked like they'd been put together by bubblegum and wire into remote areas to put eyes on the situation on the ground, to ensure that food was going to the people who were that the food was being provided to. So I don't deny that on occasions we would find some areas where there were difficulties, but the purpose was to make sure that that didn't happen and to ensure that it stopped and to hold people accountable who were taking advantage of our aid programs. So I have heard the complaints, I've heard the accusations, and my response to that is that's why we have people like me, people like our USAID colleagues who are monitoring, who are evaluating these programs to ensure that the programs are meeting the requirements that were put in place when we made the decision to provide assistance.
We're talking with former UN ambassador and UW-Madison alumna Linda Thomas Greenfield about her decades in foreign service and her upcoming talk at her alma mater. Ambassador, when our attention is focused on Russia's war on Ukraine or the conflict in Gaza, what happens about crises in Africa?
They are ignored, they are forgotten, and they are neglected. And having served most of my career in Africa, I committed myself to ensuring that they would not be forgotten. So when I took my visits to Chad, to the refugee camps there, I carried press with me. I actually had NPR with me. I had MSNBC with me. I had Reuters with me. And on every trip, I ensured that I brought the press so that they could focus attention on neglected situations like Sudan or Democratic Republic of Congo, like Somalia, that you don't read very much about in the news at all.
I want to turn our attention to Gaza. As head of the UN Security Council, you had voted against multiple measures for ceasefires in Gaza. What would you say to students who protested here in Wisconsin and elsewhere that are still upset about the lives lost, and as we see Israel resuming airstrikes on Hamas targets in Gaza?
Well, first thing I would say is their protest, their anger is heard, and it was taken into account as we tried to figure out a path to a diplomatic solution to the situation in Gaza. And while there were some resolutions that we voted against, people have ignored the fact that there were a number of resolutions that we allowed to pass. And those resolutions dealt with the humanitarian situation. Those resolutions that we put on the tables, the Russians vetoed a resolution that we put on the table calling for a ceasefire, calling for the release of hostages and demanding that Hamas be condemned for the actions that they had taken. And so while the situation now has gone back into conflict, I am very pleased that many of the hostages have been released since I left my position. And this was a major goal of ours, getting the hostages released and getting assistance to the desperate people in Gaza. Diplomacy is hard. I would say that regularly. I'd say it in speeches in the Security Council. And a lot goes into diplomatic efforts and a lot goes into negotiations. And when we have resolutions, we're negotiating a lot of detail. And sometimes we get what we want and what we need and what we think is important to address the situation. And other times we don't. And in those situations, we're forced into a position of vetoing a resolution or into abstaining on a resolution that allows that resolution to pass. So I understand the frustrations that students felt. I talked to demonstrators on a regular basis outside our mission. I spoke to Palestinians. I met with hostages, and I still feel their pain.
When you mention the release of hostages and that diplomacy is hard, it makes me think about your upcoming talk about the art of negotiation. Why is negotiation like an art form in your eyes?
It is an art form because it's not. There's no recipe for negotiations. There's not an agenda that allows you to go from point A to point Z and get out of negotiations what you want. And different people have different negotiating styles. And my negotiating style has always been one in which I listen to my adversaries because I want them to listen to me. And so it's about showing a level of respect. You don't have to agree with people when you're sitting in a negotiation, but you have to have enough respect for them that they will listen to you and that you will listen to them. And then you get closer to each other. And eventually, and it doesn't happen in one meeting or two meetings or even 5 meetings. Eventually, you get to a place where you have a meeting of the minds and you come out with a settlement.
Ambassador, are there lessons from your international negotiations that you'd like to see domestic leaders apply, perhaps more broadly, to working across the political aisle here in our country?
I think politics and diplomacy are similar, but there are some massive differences. But I think the one common denominator for me is respect. And the second part of that respect is being able to listen. And so in order to come to agreements, you have to hear out the other side. And the other side has to hear out you. And then you eventually come to a place where you don't get everything you want, but you get some of the things you want, and the other side gets some of the things that it wants. And you come out with something that I think in the end, everyone is satisfied with.
It's not an all or nothing type of proposition.
It's not an all or nothing. And if you go for all or nothing, you rarely will win. And nobody wins when you go for all or nothing.
Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, it's been an absolute honor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to being on the university's campus next week.
That was Linda Thomas Greenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations from 2021 to 2025. Kate Archer-Kent spoke with the ambassador about her foreign service career and a talk she's giving at her alma mater, UW-Madison. She speaks at the school's Memorial Union on Tuesday. Still ahead on Wisconsin Today, egg prices have been on a roller coaster. A Kenosha diner is adding a surcharge to menu items. 1 egg, $1. 2 to 3 eggs, $2 more.
And our full garbage plate, which has 5 eggs, we're charging you an additional $3.
How a restaurant owner and an egg farmer are managing the egg crisis. That's next on WPR News. It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett. Egg prices soared to new record highs in February, and since then, wholesale prices have come down as egg supplies get back closer to normal as bird flu cases level off. Even as wholesale prices fall, consumers may not feel the impacts for a while as inventory takes time to turn over. And in recent months, grocery stores put limits on egg carton purchases. Some restaurants added egg surcharges to their menus. That's the case at Frank's Diner in Kenosha. The restaurant's been operating for almost 100 years. Co-owner Julie Rittmiller spoke with Kate Archer-Kent last week.
Well, run us through your kitchen. On a typical day, how many eggs does your restaurant go through?
On a weekend, we would go through, I just have to do a little math because a case is 180.
Mm-hmm.
And typically on a weekend day, we would go through 4 of those, 3.5 to 4 of those. So we would go through 720 eggs on a Saturday or Sunday.
Wow, that's a lot of breaking of eggs.
Yes, it is. And now we're afraid to break them if they're not going into the pan or on the grill.
I bet. We've seen egg prices just go through the roof, right?
It's crazy.
A dozen eggs on average costing nearly $6. And then, you're buying cases of eggs.
Correct.
How do egg prices for your restaurant compare to before the bird flu outbreak shortage?
I looked back on this. So on 10/21, I paid $35.99 for 180 eggs. 2 weeks ago, they were $130. Last week, I paid $123 on the 14th. Now this week, when I go to order on Thursday, they'll be $111.50. So they have come down a little, but with Easter right around the corner, they'll go back up because people dye white eggs.
Oh, are these prices sustainable for your business?
They're right now, we're doing okay. We do have an egg upcharge. So if you get one egg, we're charging you an additional $1. If you get 2 to 3 eggs, we're charging you an additional $2. And our full garbage plate, which has 5 eggs, we're charging you an additional $3.
Do customers understand the surcharge?
Yes, yes. We've actually only had one full-on complaint and a couple people just questioning it. But when you ask them if they've been to the grocery store lately, I've only had one person say no.
Do you think that this surcharge is here to stay?
I'm hoping not. That's why we didn't raise our menu prices, because we really do, hope these prices come down. Like I said, I don't think we're going to know anything truly till after Easter.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You certainly, you certainly don't want to print all new menus.
Correct, exactly. And rather than take everything up, since it really is eggs, and then coffee's another one, but eggs is the biggest. I think it's easier for people to handle if it's a surcharge.
Not every restaurant has passed along price increases to customers. How difficult was this decision for you, Julie?
It was very difficult. And we've probably been doing this about a month. So we held steady with our prices for months because they just kept rising. November, December. And it's crazy. It's up over 200%.
Have you been shopping around with other suppliers, or do you stick with the same one?
Pretty much everybody's at the same price. What we have tried to do is, I learned many years ago around Easter that brown eggs or free-range eggs don't go up in price. Traditionally, they're always more expensive than white eggs, but at Easter, they don't really rise. So as white eggs become more expensive. So I've been on some allocations for the brown or free range eggs. But a lot of those suppliers have their set restaurants that they've dealt with for years. And kudos to them, they're being very loyal. So I can maybe get 3 to 10 cases of eggs every couple weeks, but it's not like I can get my allotment that I really need.
And it's not like you can use a lower size or a lower grade egg, like a medium instead of a large.
We can't, no. Because our restaurant, we cook in front of customers. So that's part of the uniqueness and the fun of it, is our cooks are really great at cracking eggs. And to see that, happening very quickly and very accurately, it's part of the fun. And also, we could use egg product, which is a liquid egg that's frozen and then you thaw it, which a lot of restaurants out east in the New York area are doing that. But I know you've probably had an omelet at a brunch or scrambled eggs, and they just don't taste the same, and they don't fluff up in pancakes the same, and you can't do a fried egg.
And eggs have historically been a less expensive source of protein.
Yes.
And some restaurants have built their menu around that price stability of that protein. Does this moment feel unsettling for you, or is this a shift, do you think?
It's very unsettling because eggs is a huge percent of our menu, not just eggs themselves, but we make our own bread, we make our own biscuits and gravy. We've got cakes that we do, pancakes, French toast, all of that.
All of it. It goes in
using
there.
eggs quite a bit. Exactly.
What about those restaurants and those diners that have been around maybe 2 years, maybe a year? What is your advice to them in this moment?
It's hard. I think you've really got to listen to your customers, sit down, talk to people, make your restaurant as welcoming as it can be, and explain. If you have to raise prices, most people do understand. And I think if you have that connection with customers, they'll understand and they'll support you. Get involved in the community too. That's just huge. If you're a new restaurant, join a couple of organizations and support those local parades, fireworks, baseball, softball, whatever it is.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Kate.
That was Julie Rittmiller, co-owner of Frank's Diner in Kenosha, where there are egg surcharges on the menu due to the spike in egg prices. Now for a look at how egg farmers are dealing with bird flu challenges affecting their operations and wholesale price fluctuations. We turn to Steve Albert, co-owner of Prairie Bluff Farm. It's an organic egg farm near Mount Horeb. Steve, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
It's nice to be with you today, Kate.
Can you talk about your flock of chickens, your numbers, and your pasture land that you raise them on?
We would be considered a small farm in the egg world. We have about 1,500 hens, and that varies a bit depending on the time of year. Right now, our numbers are almost double that because we have 2 flocks on the farm, the older birds from last year and newer hens that we've just received on Saturday. And we keep the older hens until the new ones are laying and in good production. And then we distribute our older hens to a lot of backyard flocks. And then also a number of them are brought to a processing facility where they become stewing hens.
We've seen some wild fluctuations in egg prices. What impact is this having on your farm?
It's been interesting. It sure has been an upside down world as far as the pricing goes. Whereas typically when you go to the store, the more conventional egg coming out of the larger style farms has been cheaper, and we would be a little more expensive. And now lately it's been the opposite. We have long-term relationships with our customers. There's different types of farms, and ours is a type where basically the only eggs we sell are the eggs that we produce here. And this type of farm is the least common in today's egg market, but it does give us long-term relationships with our customers. And although we have some small raises, usually on an annual or biannual basis in our price to compensate for inflationary types of things, there hasn't been any large markup on the cost of our eggs because of that. And because we want to make sure we have our customers when all this is over too.
I want to get to the customers in a moment, but why are some cage-free or brown eggs less expensive now than the traditional white eggs?
I think it really varies. There's just about as many different ways of pricing eggs as there are brands on the market. So you have a place like ours where our main inflationary pressure is going to be our cost of our grain. And if the grain price is pretty stable, which it has been, we don't have a great need to raise that price. And our birds have been healthy. We haven't lost hens due to this illness. So there really isn't a lot of need other than just kind of general inflation for us to raise our price, and just for our own household to kind of keep up with increases in the cost of insurance or those kinds of things. And that isn't a big price jump. There are other types of farms that something like, and I don't want to speak for anyone else, but you have a situation like Organic Valley where their prices have also remained pretty stable, but for different reasons. They contract ahead with both the customers they distribute to and their farmers for what their price is going to be for a period of months. Then you have another type, which you can have a central place where a lot of different farms are bringing eggs to wash their eggs, and they will be then sold as a particular brand. And it's a central washing facility. And and that would be another way. And I've noticed that those prices tend to be quite stable too.
I do want to get to your customers. You sell your eggs to restaurants in the Dane County area. Are you seeing changes from your clients, or are they shopping around perhaps, or are they sticking with you?
Yeah, we've just had an increase in requests from new clients for the eggs. And unfortunately, I can't ask the girls out there to put out 2 eggs a day instead of 1. So we haven't been able to meet a lot of those requests. Our current customers have been sticking with us, and we're always grateful for that. It's also harder to find eggs right now other places. So there's that as well. And we distribute to restaurants, to stores, to farm CSAs. We'll be starting that up soon, where they sell vegetables to their customers, and they'll include eggs as part of that. We sell to private customers, come out, and we have our own neighborhood sites in the Madison area that we provide eggs to. And that has all remained very stable, with just an increase in the demand right now for the eggs.
It sounds as if you have customers who would love to do business with you, but you don't have the supply to grow in that way. Do you do anything to increase egg laying, like, providing artificial lighting or anything like that?
During the winter, basically for our buildings, we can use 3 60-watt, or not 60-watt, watt equivalent LED lights in one of our winter housing. It's a hoop type building with a solar film on the south side and insulated on the north side. And that will keep 500 birds with enough light so that they will keep in production throughout the winter. They always have 8 to 9 hours of darkness every night.
Mm-hmm.
And then the lights usually come on about 6 in the morning, and they'll go off at 9:30 to 10 o'clock at night. And that's what we do, regardless of whether there's increased demand or not. The only thing that we can really do to increase the production or the availability of eggs from our farm is we are considering keeping our older birds longer this spring. The birds tend to decrease in production, and the shell quality isn't quite as good that next year of laying. And so a lot of times when you're producing eggs commercially, it isn't cost effective to keep the birds longer than about 13 months of laying. But we are considering that this year, keeping some birds through the summer just to have more eggs available for people.
Steve, thanks for making time for us.
Thank you, Kate. It was nice to speak with you.
That was Steve Albert, co-owner and operator of Prairie Bluff Farm, a certified organic egg farmer near Mount Horeb. Earlier, we heard from Julie Rittmiller, the co-owner of Frank's Diner in Kenosha. Been talking about the effects of low egg supplies and price spikes with a restaurant owner and egg farmer as the bird flu outbreak earlier this year decimated flocks, wiped out supplies, and sent prices soaring. Some people throw the word awesome around pretty freely. People like, well, me. But next week, we're going to have a conversation about the actual feeling of awe and of wonder. A UW lacrosse expert will give us some advice on how to feel awe in our daily lives. So how about you? Is there a moment in your life where you felt awestruck by a natural wonder, an experience, or maybe just a quiet moment in nature? Do you have ways to find a sense of wonder in your daily life? Tell us about it. Email wisconsintoday@wpr.org. Or you can call or text to get in touch at 888-642-0232. That's 888-642-0232. Let us know. We can share your story. It'd be awesome. Wisconsin Today is the work of a team of producers, hosts, and technical directors. Learn more about us at wpr.org/Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Ferrett. You're listening to WPR News.